Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account, Chapter 23. He Has Come. Third Age, 3011. Today, the present. They were still alive. No one knew how, not even the elves, but they were still alive. They were still free. Sauron had not yet risen. 20 years after the Witch King took the One Ring, the Dark Lord had not yet returned, and no one could figure out how or why. The Witch King's will was enslaved by Sauron. The moment he got the ring, Sauron would have sensed it and demanded his Nazgûl Lord give it to him as quickly as possible. Flames would leap up from Barad-dûr. Sauron would rise in all his evil glory, and a second darkness would cover Middle-earth, its people doomed to slavery and death at the Shadow's hands. And yet, nothing had happened. Mordor was silent. The remaining 8 Nazgûl had not been seen in 20 years. The orcs and other servants of the darkness kept attacking, but they were no more terrible or powerful than they had been before. A bitter period of preparing, alliance-making, and terrified waiting rippled through the people of Middle-earth. The elves, dwarves, men, and even hobbits united and held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. Nothing happened. And that was more terrifying than all of the Dark Lords in Arda. As the years of nothingness passed, some of the alliances lost their strength, wariness between races rising once more. Most prominently, Denethor practically broke off his treaty with the elves, claiming Gondor did not need the help of the immortals. He only sent his son, Boromir, to the bi-yearly meetings of the Free People as a formality. In reality, there was barely any trust left in many of the men of Gondor for the elves. Mostly, it was Faramir, the steward's younger son, that insisted that Boromir continue to attend the meetings in case something new occurred. And the older son of Denethor listened to his brother, so hope for Gondor remained. Surprisingly, the alliance between the elves of Mirkwood and the dwarves of Erebor remained one of the strongest in Middle-earth. More secluded than Lothlorien and Rivendell, Mirkwood instead turned to its neighbors of Dale and Erebor, making potential battle plans and keeping in contact with each other. The men of Dale also took part in said meetings, though to a lesser degree than the other 2 races. Much had changed in the past 20 years. Along with the gut-wrenching foreboding and fear that plagued all, the darkness had already struck the world in a way that could not be reversed. The Shire was uninhabitable, the dark fire that the Nazgûl had used to burn parts of it, resulting in a horrifying transformation in the once beautiful land. The ground no longer could be used to grow crops. The green fields would not grow back. No sun shone down through the dark, looming clouds, and the trees were almost as shadowed as the ones within Mirkwood. The Nazgûl had not lingered after gaining the ring just to inspire fear, but to punish those that had hidden it from them for so long. The cursed dark fire had done its job. It had held a piece of the darkness of Minas Morgul, an evil so potent that it had poisoned the land. The Shire was now unrecognizable, and its hobbit natives would have been homeless if not for Bilbo. The fall of the Shire had been unexpected and shocking, but the other races had stepped up and offered new homes to the refugee hobbits. Bilbo's connections and friendships with Rivendell, Dale, and Erebor allowed his people to migrate to and live with the elves, dwarves, or men of those realms. Most from Hobbiton and the Shire chose to go to the mortal realms, too in awe of the elves to be able to live with them. But some stayed closer to home and went to the hidden valley. Some of these hobbits, including Frodo, continually traveled between the Elven realm and the Shire, hoping to find some change in their home. Every month there was none, the ground remaining black and bleak, unable to support life. So the hobbits remained where they were, sometimes in little towns of their own if they had settled in Dale or Erebor, yet all of them yearned for the open green fields, clear rivers, and long-missed hobbit holes they had lost. It was the loss of the Shire and the continued absence of Sauron and the Ring that caused the Free People to hold meetings in Rivendell every year. Their purpose was for the leaders to check with each other and to make sure that the darkness was not creeping up to surround them. They tried to figure out the enemy's movements, agonized over trying to discover what had happened to the Ring, and frankly wondered why they were not in the war for Middle-earth yet. Important leaders were present at this year's meeting, from the races of elves, men, hobbits, wizards, and even an eagle. The participants were Gandalf, Elrond, Aragorn, King Theoden of Rohan, Theodred, Éomer, Boromir of Gondor, Aristor, Glorfindel, Bilbo Baggins, and Gwaihir, the Wind Lord. Lothlorien was absent from this council by request of the Lady of the Light herself. She did not speak of her reasons for not attending, only hinting that her instincts were telling her to remain in her realm this time. Mirkwood rarely attended the meetings, unwilling to leave their home with the shadow so ready to strike. The same was said of the dwarves of Erebor. The elves and dwarves of those realms, who for so long had disagreed with each other, now had the same mentality and thoughts. They refused to let their guard down, and were waiting for the war they knew would one day come. The council was already commencing. The topics that had been discussed and discarded before reopened with new ideas and insight, in a hope to reveal the enemy's plans. "Perhaps the Witch King wants to keep the ring for himself," Aristor ventured. "His lust for the ring might be stronger than we originally thought." "It has been 20 years. If that were true, he would not be able to resist Sauron this long," Gandalf muttered. "None of this world are powerful enough to break the Dark Lord's hold over his servant, and the ring would not condone being held by one such as the Witch King, especially not when it could easily be given to its master." "Have there been any signs that Sauron himself is gaining physical form?" Theoden asked Boromir, whose home was closest to Mordor. The captain of Gondor shook his head, running a hand over his tired face. "No. Mordor is as silent as ever. Our spies report that there has been no activity in Minas Morgul since the Witch King took the ring inside." "Sauron has not been resurrected, and has not gained a physical body of any kind," Elrond stated ominously. "I sense that something has kept him from regaining a powerful form after the White Council defeated him at Dol Guldur." "If that is the case, then perhaps the Witch King must be preparing a dark spell of some sort to bring him back," Gandalf mused. "Odd. I did not think that we would be able to wound Sauron so greatly. But his threat remains as long as the ring exists." "Shall we try to retrieve it?" Aragorn asked, leaning forward in his seat. Boromir spared the ranger a glance, wondering for the 1000th time who the man was and why he was at these meetings. He had heard that the man was the adopted son of Elrond, but that did not make him important enough to attend these councils. Not even Elrond's birth children were here. The captain could not find an answer to his question. Everyone he asked did not know, and he did not dare to ask the elves. "Minas Morgul is too greatly protected for us to even attempt to get inside," Gwaihir warned. "Force will not break it, and stealth is useless. The darkness in Minas Morgul has grown too strong. Any who went within the city would die." the ranger hesitated a moment before speaking softly. "We all know that Iãgaw could." "Are you sure that he would survive?" Elrond asked quietly. "I know how greatly he can shield himself, but is he strong enough to shield himself from darkness that powerful? That darkness was used to power the dark fire that destroyed the Shire. Do you think an elf, even one like Iãgaw, would be able to survive setting foot in a place that is the source of that evil? It is better that we have an ally that lives than one that dies needlessly." Aragorn kept his silence, while the other humans at the council wondered who this Iãgaw person was. "We are certain that the ring that was taken was the one ring," Theoden asked suddenly. "Perhaps it was another ring of power." Gandalf glanced at Bilbo, who was looking down at his hands guiltily. Most of the time the hobbit was his cheerful, adventurous self, but he was prone to occasional glum silences, his guilt so great it could almost be touched. In his darkest times, Bilbo blamed himself for losing the ring. He should not have used it. He should not have taken it from Gollum's cave. He should have learned more about his magic trinket. He should have shown it to Gandalf. The many things he had done and the many other things that he should have, but did not do, haunted the hobbit. The wizard knew it would only become worse if Sauron was resurrected and people died. "It was the one," the Astar said heavily, sad eyes not leaving the unusually silent Bilbo. No one disputed his claim. The meeting went on, frustrations running high within many of the participants, but they came to the inevitable conclusion that there was nothing they could do but wait. They could not make plans for a counterattack or a solid defense when they had no idea what the enemy was doing. The men from Rohan, Gandalf, and Gwaihir left later that day, each hurrying off to their own destination. Theoden, Theodred, and Éomer returned to Rohan. Gandalf went east to Eriador, intent on reaching the Shire and hoping that maybe the new spell he had found would help cleanse the land. Gwaihir returned to his people, flying off with large, majestic beats. Down below, Elrond watched him go, eyes distant and not really seeing what was in front of him. He did not realize that he was being spoken to, until a tug on his sleeve startled him. He flinched and turned, relaxing when he spotted Arister. The scholar looked at his friend with concerned eyes. "Are you all right, Melanin?" "I'm fine," Elrond said. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Arister prompted. The elf lord opened his mouth, trying to find the words to describe his thoughts. "Everything. The ring, the darkness, Sauron, the Nazgûl, the Shire." He sighed, forehead crinkling and eyes tight with stress. "I know that I will regret saying this, but I just want something to happen. Right now we can do nothing more than wait, with bated breath, and hope that Sauron does not rise in Mordor and enslave us all. But—" He stopped, unsure as to whether he should share his thoughts with his friend. The other elf's eyebrow quirked upward in a way that reminded Elrond of himself. "What is it?" The elf lord was quiet a moment before he turned to look at him. "Do you remember what I told you of the White Council's battle with the necromancer?" Arister nodded gravely. "Ever since the Nazgûl gained the ring, I have been remembering every time I have faced Sauron, and wondering if he would be as powerful when he returned. However, something about the battle at Dol Guldur has been bothering me. We drove the necromancer out of the Hill of Sorcery, easily." His friend absorbed this before speaking cautiously. "Easily?" Yes, Elrond said softly, almost to himself. Easily is the correct word to describe the battle, now that I think about it. We drove Sauron out with no damage on our side, and none of the Nazgûl were present to defend their master. Perhaps the necromancer was weaker than we believed, or he did not care about keeping the Hill of Sorcery, but I am beginning to think that that is not the truth. The elf lord turned away from the view of the now empty sky, walking back towards his study. He paused and glanced at Arister out of the corner of his eye, genuine confusion and fear darkening his silver orbs. It was like Sauron had lost most of his power, like the darkness and Nazgûl had betrayed Sauron, and they were no longer helping him in any way. It was almost as if they had found a new master. "It is done," the Witch King hissed. He stood in the highest tower of Minas Morgul, the task he had been completing for the past 20 years finally finished. Carved into the ground before him was a large, complex array. It was a circle the size of the room, drawn in a red that looked like spilled blood. Within the circle was a hexagon, and in that were 2 intersecting rectangles. The pattern, circle, hexagon, crossed rectangles, repeated itself 5 more times, and along each symmetrical and carefully placed line was a series of dark runes. The entire array glowed eerily, starkly bright against the black floor, dark magic pulsing from the runes like the beat of a monster's heart. The Nazgûl's master spoke in his mind, voice echoing and harsh, but with an undertone of excitement. "Is it ready? You are certain of this?" "Yes, my lord," the Witch King informed him, his very thoughts linked to his master. "The spell is ready. All is prepared." "It had better be," the darkness warned. "There is only one chance to set me free. If a single rune is out of place, the magic will fail, and I will remain trapped." His voice deepened further, becoming a growl that seemed to make the earth tremble. "If you fail me..." The threat did not need to be completed. The Nazgûl Lord repressed a shudder, perfectly aware that his master would make him suffer for eternity if he did not succeed. That was why he had spent the last 20 years carefully following the darkness's instructions, undoing and redoing each line and rune of the array until it was perfect. Each set of runes were identical, each line the same length, and each angle the right size. The array was a complex one, the dark spell it activated even more so, but it would be worth it. The Witch King would do whatever it took to bring his master into this world, and all that was needed was the final piece. The Nazgûl walked over to the edge of the room, to a small chest sitting in the corner. It looked innocent enough, even though its metal was as black as coal. However, there was a spell in the box that would kill anyone who touched it except him, a handy little curse that would keep thieves from running off with what was inside. It was unlikely that any enemy would survive the darkness of Minas Morgul and get to his room, but it was better to be safe than sorry. He laid a gauntlet-clad hand on the top of the chest, letting it recognize his energy and magic. Once the slightly painful tingling in his extremity subsided and the chest accepted him, he took out a key and put it in the lock, turning it. The lock clicked, the top swinging upward to reveal the contents hidden inside. The one ring lay on the bottom of the box, glittering a bright gold that shone brightly against the black background. The Witch King picked up the seemingly harmless jewelry, and instantly the ring whispered in his ear. It promised power, darkness, evil, and glory, if only he would return it to Sauron. The Nazgûl scoffed and ignored the ring, his will and thoughts unaffected by its attempts at tempting him. He was no longer Sauron's slave. He had a new, more powerful master now. No magic trinket would trick him into betraying him. His master shared his disgust. Sauron was a fool to create this ring. Many call him a Dark Lord and a threat, yet he needs this little piece of jewelry to survive. How pathetic. Even more pathetic is the fact that I need the ring in order to be freed. Loathing entered the dark voice, making it drip and hiss like liquid poison. I suppose that Lorien thought it would be amusing to force me to use such a pitiful device as a key in order for me to enter this world. "What are you talking about, my lord?" the Witch King asked, confused. The trapped darkness sighed, in annoyance and rage, the room seeming to grow darker as Minas Morgul responded to its power source's anger. "The ring is the only thing within all of Arda that holds all of the requirements needed to free me," he explained with mock patience. "It holds much of a Dark Lord's power and life energy. It is an object of the darkest magics and purest evils, and was forged within the most shadowed place in this world, Mount Doom." The impression of a sneer implanted itself in the Nazgûl Lord's mind. "The Valor were very specific when they created the door that would keep me out of Arda. Of course, they only took precautions to keep me out at Lorien's insistence. Half of the Valor don't even believe I exist, and the people of Arda are not even aware of me." It was amusing to the darkness that the free people of Middle-earth were so afraid of Sauron returning. They were terrified of a shadow that was no longer a threat, the shadows of the world sensing and choosing, or being enslaved by, a more powerful master, him. Not even the elves could tell that it was not Sauron who was rising. Well, a few could, like that irritating Galadriel. He would make sure to kill her personally. But because the Valor did not fully believe in him, they did not think to even tell their precious elves and mortals about him, which meant that they would fall like lambs being slaughtered when he came, unprepared and unable to fight when he was finally free. Lorien was the only one who knew the darkness might get out of his prison. He was the Valor of prophecy, and saw all possible futures. Most had likely been outcomes of Sauron and his return, others of the resurrection of Morgoth, but a single instance where a different threat, him, had been enough for the Valor to convince his kin to help fortify his prison. The trapped darkness both admired and hated Lorien for his foresight, and his role in making it difficult for him to escape. It was only through careful planning and some strokes of luck that the darkness had been able to retrieve the ring. If the darkness of Minas Morgul had not awoken him, if the Witch King had not touched him with his mind, if his presence in Arda had not grown, then the ring would have been lost, and his chances of breaking out vanishing with it. But things were not that way, and the ring was in the hands of his servants. Now, after years of awareness and captivity, it was finally time. Though the darkness's being burned with excitement, his voice was authoritative and calm when he spoke. "Do it now." Without words or questions, the Witch King stepped onto the array, placing the one ring gently in the dark designed center. The ring's whispers grew louder and more alluring, but the Nazgûl could not feel temptation, only annoyance at the obvious desperation in the trinket's voice. His master had ordered him to begin, and begin he would. He began to chant in the harsh, chilling language of dark magic, a mix of black speech and a corrupted version of Istari spells. In response to his words, the array began to glow, its red light dancing on the black walls. The spell was long and complex, another requirement in the Valor's futile attempts to keep his master contained. For 6 nights and 6 days he spoke, never faltering or stuttering as the dark spell permeated the air around him. A single mistake would end it all. There were no second chances in this. The Witch King's rasping voice was harsh but clear, as each line and rune on the array turned a piercing, unnatural green, the sickening light slowly working its way towards the center. The light rippling on the walls changed from red to an eerie yellow-green, a heaviness entering the room as the darkness of the spell grew heavier. The ring lay on the ground, voice unheard, as it tried to reach the Nazgûl, but the Witch King was under a new master's orders, and would not be distracted. Finally, the eerie green light surrounded the ring, each rune and line blazing. The light surrounded it, lifting it into the air so it floated above the ground, at the ringwraith's eye level. Fiery eyes stared at the ring, watching the green light reflect on its gold. The ancient dark words appeared on the side of the thing that had once promised the return of Sauron. Now, it would bring a new evil into the world. The Witch King took a breath, triumph rushing through him, and spoke the final word, the only one in Sindarin. Iãgaw. A shudder went through the world, every creature and person in Middle-earth freezing, as a feeling of dread covered them all. The green light of the array blazed, shooting upward into the sky, crackling like lightning against the clouds. The array shifted and turned, like a key twisting in a lock, and the array split with an echoing crack. Instead of seeing the floor or the room below, the crack was filled with inky blackness, the blackness of emptiness and an absence of life. The blackness swirled and spun slightly, rippling and shifting like a whirlpool, but nothing was being dragged in. Something was coming out. A giant dark hand rose out of the portal, landing heavily on the ground and making it shake. Soon, an arm as large as a tree followed, then a head. He gripped the sides of the portal, painstakingly pulling himself out of the rip in the world. The void beneath him attempted to pull him back in, tearing at him and trying to haul him back where he had come from, but the darkness would not be imprisoned again. With a final heave, he escaped the rip between Arda and his former home, stepping on the ground so hard that the entire building shook. The portal behind him snapped close, having failed to bring him back, the rift between the worlds sealed and unable to be opened again. 25 feet tall, with arms as thick as oaks, the freed darkness straightened, looming over the Witch King. His entire form was darker than the darkest abyss, the light around him seeming to drain away as it was dragged screaming and wailing down into nothingness. Even the shadowy Minas Morgul seemed darker, everything losing what little light there was, but the Witch King's master was somehow as clearly seen as blackness in the light of day. His head was cowled, hiding his face, but 2 demonic red eyes glowed out from the void like devouring flames, ready to swallow up and destroy everything around them. His form wavered slightly, as if he were made up completely of shadows, but was in the vague shape of a giant man. The darkness looked left, then right, taking in the area around him. A shift in the shadows beneath his cowl indicated that he may have been smiling. His head tilted back, and he roared at the sky, screaming his wordless rage and triumph. He was free! In Rivendell, Arister went rigid, eyes widening until the whites showed all the way around his pupils. He turned to Elrond, expression blank, and spoke. "It is too late. He has come." Then, the elf collapsed. In Lothlorien, Galadriel cried out, clutching her head as 1,000 visions ripped through her mind. Darkness, darkness, blood, death, darkness, shadow, death, darkness. A repeating cycle of destruction and evil raced through her mind. no visions of hope or light coming to her. She sank to her knees, hands over her eyes, as Celeborn tried to desperately find out what was wrong with his wife. Galadriel could not answer, so caught up in her visions was she. She saw the great darkness rise up, saw Middle-earth fall to a shadow even stronger than Sauron. She saw realms be conquered and destroyed, one by one. Dwarves fought bravely against beings of darkness and shadow. Men fell and died as orcs invaded Minas Tirith, and both Rivendell and Lothlorien were burned to the ground, the elves fighting, fleeing, screaming, and dying as the darkness roared in triumph. She saw her family die. On a road in Bree, Gandalf fell to one knee, unable to breathe. The darkness, so far away and yet so close, pressed down on him. He, laughed in a voice that was 1,000 souls screaming in pain. He knew the 3 ring-bearers could sense him and hear him as clearly as he could sense them thanks to the ring that had been used to free him. He laughed at them, seeing them, their rings, and their realms as clearly as one saw a city in the middle of an open plain. Haldir's words from so long ago echoed in Galadriel's mind, heard by them all. He is awake. Fael's warning whispered through Gandalf's thoughts and was heard by others, drawn out by the one that had awoken. He is coming. Gandalf had been right. Fael's odd words had been meant to alert them. If only Galadriel had spoken of Haldir's strange lapse in attention. If only Gandalf had revealed his worries about Fael's warning. If only the 3 ring-bearers had been more in touch with each other. There were too many if-onlys, too many regrets. But there was nothing they could do now. He has come. Who was he? Not the Witch King, as they had desperately hoped, not Sauron as they had feared, not even Morgoth, who they dreaded most of all. No. This entity was worse than the Dark Lords. This being was barely known and rarely acknowledged, a thing commonly not thought about and mostly ignored. If he was named, he was said to be a place, an emptiness, a thing without consciousness. He had been a legend, a distant whisper too soft for any to hear or take heed of. After all, he had not been a threat. He had been in a coma-like state since his awakening. At least that was what all, meaning the Valar who had considered the possibility that he existed, had believed. They should have known better, all of them. They were the ones that powered him after all. They kept him separate from Arda and imprisoned all dark things inside him. Evil ideas, powers, thoughts, and beings were all trapped in him, their darkness seeping into his very core. All of the hatred, anger, and cruelty of his prisoners became him, and he became them. He absorbed them and became sentient, but not yet aware, until the darkness of Minas Morgul woke him up. And once he woke up, he realized he was trapped in the shield that kept him and those he had become one with from entering Arda. He wanted out. For years he bashed and raged against the shield, unable to break free, but allowing small bits of himself through. Lorien had foreseen that he might awaken one day, and had taken many precautions to keep him out of Middle-earth. But there was one thing the Valar had not known about him. He may not be able to enter Arda, but he could see into and influence it. By planting pieces of his darkness into fading elf souls, and by taking over the Nazgûl's wills, he was able to use them to learn about Arda, and use his slaves to set about putting his plans in motion. He had one goal at that time: to be free. And thanks to the Valar, he knew exactly what was needed for him to enter the world. While the Valar had sealed him, he may not have been awake or aware, but he still heard all around him. and once he awoke, he remembered. He remembered how Lorien spoke of a ring that may soon be created, how it would be forged in a fire with the Dark Lord's soul, and he instantly knew that it was the key. He knew this because when he absorbed pieces of the consciousness and souls of all the darkness imprisoned within him, he gained their knowledge of dark spells and magic. Also, Lorien had openly told him about the only things that could destroy him, knowing that he could hear the valor and would remember. After all, the only thing that could free him was forged in the same place as the only things that could kill him. How annoyingly ironic. But that did not matter. He was not even sure if the 3 black weapons existed. Even if they did, all he had to do was kill one of the wielders, and the problem would be solved. For now, he would not care about prophecy and meddlesome valor. It was impossible that anyone even knew of the weapons. This was not the time for worries. It was the time for triumph. Finally, after so long being trapped, he was finally out. The blackness he had once been remained trapped, and still kept prisoner the lingering bits of those he had absorbed into himself. But his consciousness, his self, was free. He was the prison of Morgoth. He was the blackness outside of the world. He was the evil within everyone's thoughts, and the darkness within all people's souls. He filled the void in fading elf spirits, enslaving their will and corrupting them from the inside. He was a demon, evil incarnate, and now he had a physical form. Now he was free. He was Iãgaw. He was the void. And in Mirkwood, 8 elves went still. Thranduil and Aglar were in a meeting. Thael, Megalag, and Baraneth were on separate patrols. Hanel was visiting Barhad in the palace, and Legolas was walking alone in the woods near the shadowed part of the forest. None of the royal family moved, all standing in a position that eerily mirrored each other, back straight, arms at their sides, head tilted back as if they were looking at the sky. Their eyes were blank, not seeing anything in front of them. The elves in the meeting and on the patrols remained instinctively silent, afraid to shatter the heaviness that came over them all, a feeling of ancientness and power penetrating the air. Every elf in Mirkwood felt it and went still, and even the animals and spiders were unmoving. The royal family's arms rose as one, and they looked up, as if they were about to take off and fly. Their mouths moved, voices that were their own and yet not, coming from their throats. Their voices echoed and rippled in a chorus of tones, the sound of each royal's own voice distant and tinny, like a lost undertone. Together, despite the distance between them, Thranduil, Aglar, Hanel, Megalag, Barhad, Baraneth, Thael, and Legolas began to chant. 3 times the royal family spoke the chant. Their hair whipped about them as if they were in a storm. Their eyes glowed with power, turning pure white, and their voices boomed like thunder, heard through all corners of the realm. Power pulsed and grew with every word, growing in mass and presence with every pitch and note. It touched the light trees that still survived in Mirkwood, and their acceptance of the chant's call was quick and welcoming. "They are calling us," the still light trees whisper. "The light trees shall answer." The power rushed into them like a river into a pool. The light trees shifted and woke fully, feeling stronger and more active than they had in a long time. Their branches waved and their leaves grew greener, their limbs gaining new vitality and strength. The light trees felt their full light return, the darkness prodding at them vanishing like it never existed. The chant went farther out, reaching into the darker parts of the forest. The shadow trees recoiled, shrieking and hissing in pain and disgust. "Why do the bright elves call us? Leave us alone, leave." For a moment the power halted, 7 presences struggling against the shadow trees' anger. The shadow trees snarled and snapped at them, rejecting their call and chant. But the eighth presence had no such troubles, touching the trees and whispering to them without causing pain and anger. The trees recognized the eighth. "Legolas is calling us," they said to one another. "Legolas calls upon us." They shuffled and shifted, unsure of themselves. Legolas was calling them, but the two bright, painful elves were as well. They did not want to help the two bright elves, but Legolas? A few of the shadowed trees could see Legolas, standing in the forest and looking like a spirit of nature and storms. He called upon them again, one voice reaching their darkened minds, and the shadowed trees made a decision. "Legolas calls us. We will help Legolas." The shadowed trees answer the call. With this acceptance, the shadowed trees changed. They did not become untouched by darkness like their light kin, but grew stronger and wilder, with sharper leaves and whipping limbs. They could move like they never could, swinging and twisting like a creature made of flesh. And suddenly, the light did not hurt so much, and was not so painful to see. So while the shadowed trees felt wilder, they also felt calmer. And suddenly, they hated the dark creatures in and beneath their boughs. The spiders inside Mirkwood sensed the change in the trees and shrieked, fleeing outside of the power's influence and hiding on the other side of the river. The orcs too felt the power and flinched, some collapsing and screaming as the chant reached their ears. Annie, within the forest, ran with the spiders, unable to stand the chant echoing through the woods. They did not stop running until they were out of the realm, where the chant was not heard and the power did not press down upon them. Dol Guldur, its occupants empty and its power much weakened after the White Council's attack, cracked, a long jagged line running across its base. Pieces of stone rained down. No one was around to see the hill of sorcery collapse, crumbling in on itself and sending dust flying up into the air. Luckily for the shadow, the fortress had been abandoned after the White Council's invasion. A single shadowed oak tree stood in the center of the rubble, in the remainders of a courtyard. It raised its limbs in triumph and called to its allies, which it could see for the first time in many years. The shadow was not purged, but pushed out with force, only the shadowed but more sane trees remaining within Mirkwood and keeping it true to its name. The best way to hide light was with shadows, after all. The trees bordering the forest wound their limbs together, closing off the great roads that led into Mirkwood and sealing the realm, an impassable fence grown from the ground. One could walk around the entire forest and find no place to get into it. The only way someone could get inside was if the shadow trees moved aside and let them in. It was done. Where they stood, the royals lowered their arms, the sense of power fading from around and within them. No one moved, not royals, warriors, or council members. All were silent, waiting with bated breath to see what would happen next. In the council chamber, the Elven King looked up, his eyes back to their natural blue hue. "We are safe," Thranduil said in a vague, echoing voice. His gaze was still blank and far away, seeing things no one else could. A tear trickled down his cheek, dropping unnoticed to the floor. "My lord, what is it?" Tolui asked, alarmed. His hand stretched out, but he did not touch his king, afraid that doing so would break the calmness surrounding his lord. "I felt him," the Sindar whispered vaguely in that same echoing tone. "He is alive." Thranduil's dazed eyes looked at him, and a smile crossed his face, an expression of pure joy despite the distance in his eyes. "Legolas." As one, the 8 members of the royal family collapsed. Back in Minas Morgul, a glint of gold caught Iãgaw's crimson eyes. He looked down, eyes narrowing with dislike, and picked up the ring from where it had fallen on the floor. He had thought it would be destroyed during the ritual, but apparently not. The ring shuddered and quaked in the dark monster's hold, the lettering along its band glowing brightly. Iãgaw let it go, watching as it floated up in front of his face. 2 giant hands rose and slammed together around the ring. A high-pitched, agonized scream ripped through the air, heard by all corners of the world. A violent light shone out from between his fingers, and the one ring exploded into dust. Without fanfare or dramatics, the one ring was destroyed, its weakened master dying with it as swiftly as a candle flame perished in the wind. Power was such a petty thing, and something that was once seen as powerful could be easily overcome by something more so. But Iãgaw did not need to be concerned about that. Nothing was more powerful than him. The giant hands fell, and an expression of contempt crossed the shadowy face. That done, he looked north, in the vague direction of the 2 ring-bearing elven realms, and spoke. Awaken. And another shudder went through the world. A loud bang, followed by a startled scream, sent Glorfindel's already alarmed mind into overdrive. The Vanir ran towards the distressed sound, bursting into Elrond's study with his sword drawn. His friend was on the ground with an unconscious Aristor at his side, breathing heavily as he stared at the black scorch mark on the floor with shock. "Are you all right? What happened?" the Balrog Slayer demanded. He stared at the scorch mark, eyes narrowed. "What caused that?" Elrond whipped around to face him, eyes wild and filled with fear. "Vilya is gone. So is the one ring. It exploded into shadows and flames. If Galadriel had not warned me to remove it." "What?" The Paradel ignored the stunned Vanir, eyes widening. He stumbled to his feet, gripping Glorfindel's arm tightly to gain his attention. "That doesn't matter," he snapped urgently. "Gather the warriors and prepare for attack." The Balrog Slayer stared at him incredulously. "The destruction of the ring doesn't... Wait, what attack?" Elrond's eyes darkened. The one who destroyed the ring was momentarily connected to it. Through it, he saw the bearers of the 3 rings of power, and through us, he saw the elven realms. It took a moment for his words to sink in. "No," Glorfindel whispered. "Yes," the Elf Lord said softly, painfully. "The enemy know where we are. They're coming to Rivendell." The Vanir went from stillness and shock to movement in a second. He raced out of the door, trusting Elrond to check on Aristor, as he ran towards the warriors' quarters. In the hall he slammed into someone, both elves falling to the ground. Glorfindel regained his footing, glancing at the other. Relief washed through him. The other elf was one of his warriors. "Lifin, gather as many warriors as you can and prepare for an attack. The enemy has found us," he said rapidly. Without even glancing at the other, he went to continue his urgent run to warn his warriors, only to halt when the warrior in front of him did not move. "Lifin," he said sharply, "now is not the time for freezing." The warrior did not speak or move. Then, abrupt as a lightning strike, he struck, fist slamming into the side of the Balrog Slayer's head. He fell, vision blurring and blackness creeping in on his vision, the blow knocking awareness from him like water closing over his head. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him were the warrior's eyes. Eyes once blue were no longer the bright color of an elf's gaze. Now they were a dark, merciless black, the sclera and irises completely taken over, as if the elf had the eyes of a bug or a demon. Too late, Glorfindel remembered that Lifin was a shadowed elf. Too late, he understood what the darkness in the shadowed elves wanted. Too late, he realized why the tainted elves had been so benign, acted so loyal, and pretended to be completely themselves. Their master had ordered them to wait for him. The Shadowed Elves were no longer loyal to Elrond or the Free People. The Shadowed Elves no longer had to hide their true selves. It was too late for them, and for the ones they had betrayed. They were no longer in control of their own minds. They no longer fought for the Free People of Middle-earth. They had been awoken. Their master had come.